Hello, I'm Pastor John Bischoff from United Lutheran Church. It's so glad that you're joining us with our Faith, Your Vote Bible series as we look during this fall season at different topics and issues that typically come up during election season here in America. Today we're going to be looking at legal systems and rules and laws throughout the Bible and what both the Old Testament and the New Testament has to say about how we follow those rules and how we pass judgment on others. So in the Jewish Bible, the Old Testament that we call, there are over 600 rules and laws listed. Along with many of these rules and laws are the punishments that ought to be for those who break those laws. Now these laws were written at a very specific time and place and for a very specific group of people, the Israelites. Questions often come up for us Christians are these laws still in effect for us? Are all the laws and punishments listed in the Bible to still be enforced? For example, is the death sentence still needed to be met out on a child who talks back or insults their parents? Are we still to refrain from eating shellfish and pork? Most people would agree that many of the laws found in the Old Testament should still be followed. We know that murder is wrong, stealing is wrong, slandering or talking bad about another person is wrong, and they all deserve some form of punishment. But stoning a child to death just because they talk back to their parents? The purpose of the laws and rules in any society is really to establish standards or norms, to maintain order, to resolve disputes, and to protect other people's rights. Laws and rules are not always a one-size-fits-all type of idea. Next, we're going to look at some of the biblical laws and rules and the ways that the Bible suggests that we enforce these laws and exact justice. First reading for today comes from Exodus 18. The next day, Moses was settling disputes among the people, and he was kept busy from morning till night. When Jethro saw everything that Moses had to do, he asked him, "What is all this that you are doing for the people? Why are you doing this all alone, with people standing here from morning till night to consult with you?" Moses answered, "I must do this because the people come to me to learn God's will. When two people have a dispute, they come to me, and I decide which one of them is right. And I tell them God's commands and laws." Moses then took Jethro's advice and chose capable men among the Israelites. He appointed them as leaders of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens, and they served as judges for the people on a permanent basis, bringing the difficult cases to Moses, but deciding the smaller disputes themselves. From the very start, we see that there has been a need for judges, courts, and rules for a couple of reasons. Humans are sinful, and the ways in which we read and interpret laws and rules are not always clear. So there needs to be someone or a group of people who can listen to all sides of a disagreement and find a resolution or a solution to the issue. Hopefully, that solution will be found in an impartial way based solely on the rules and laws. This story of Moses and Jethro also speaks to the emotional toll and the physical toll that comes from judging others over their disputes. It's not a job that just one person can do on their own. This story also points out that there are many disputes between God's people. Disputes and disagreements are a natural part of being in community, including people of God. A reading from Exodus 21. If someone leaves a pit open or digs a pit and does not cover it, and an ox or a donkey falls into it, the owner of that pit shall make restitution, giving money to its owner, but keeping the dead animal. If someone's ox hurts the ox of another so that it dies, then they shall sell the live ox and divide the price of it. And the dead animal they shall also divide. But if it was known that the ox was accustomed to gore in the past, and its owner did not restrain it, the owner shall restore ox for ox, but keep the dead animal. The laws in the Bible are not just about what we can and can't do. It's not just a list of thou shalts and thou shalt nots. The Bible also gives us guidance regarding how we deal with personal injury, personal accountability. In these two cases, we see that the individuals are not just accountable for their own personal actions, but they are also being held accountable for the actions of their property. Justice and restitution is then given. A reading from Deuteronomy 19. Now this is the case of a homicide, that is, someone who has killed another person unintentionally when the two were not enemies before. Suppose someone goes into the forest with another to cut wood, and when one of them swings the axe to cut down the tree, the head of the axe slips off the handle, striking the other person, who then dies. The killer may flee to one of these cities and live. But if the distance is too great, the avenger of blood in hot anger might pursue and overtake and put that killer to death. Although a death sentence was not deserved, since the two were not enemies before. Therefore I command you, you shall set apart 3 cities. Now in this text, a little background, these cities were called sanctuary cities. They were set apart at different distances so that if an accident were to happen, the person who killed the other person could flee to that sanctuary city until an appropriate time when a judgment could be passed to figure out if a wrongdoing was done. In these sanctuary cities, the person who was wronged could not go and avenge the death of their friend or family until the courts were able to hear the case. In Deuteronomy 19, it goes on to say this: but if someone is an enemy with another, lies in wait and attacks and takes the life of that person and flees to one of these cities, then the elders of the killer's city shall send to have the culprit taken from there and handed over to the avenger of blood to be put to death. Show no pity. You shall purge the guilt of innocent blood from Israel, so that it may go well with you. Again, we hear the notion of these sanctuary cities. And what happens is that if somebody does intentionally kill out of anger and they flee to a sanctuary city, they cannot be permitted to stay in that sanctuary city. Instead, they are handed over to the officials where they can then be put to death for a killing. So they do believe in the death penalty. When we take these two stories together, it does say that accidents will happen. And when they happen, there needs to be a way for justice to still be served while protecting both parties. If an accidental death does occur, the person should not be punished in the same way as if they took the life out of anger. If someone does murder another person out of anger, then the murderer needs to be held accountable and punished according to the laws. The Bible shows that there is a difference between intentional homicide and accidental homicide, and the judgment on those two crimes should be different. The 5th commandment, thou shalt not kill or murder, has some nuance to it that we need to understand. This 5th commandment is not a prohibition on taking life in all situations. Throughout the Bible, we hear that we can legally take another person's life in acts of self-defense and in justifiable war. But you cannot shed the blood of an innocent person. This commandment is a prohibition on taking the life of another person out of anger or to seek revenge. In the Old Testament, the death penalty is prescribed for murder. The death penalty is also prescribed for other actions, such as bearing false witness on a capital charge, incest, adultery, idolatry, bestiality, child sacrifice to pagan gods, cursing a parent, fortune-telling, homosexuality, and those just name a few. In Exodus chapter 21, we hear these words: whoever strikes a person mortally shall be put to death. If it was not premeditated, but came out by an act of God, then I will appoint for you a place to which the killer may flee. But if someone willfully attacks and kills another person by treachery, you shall take the killer from my altar for execution. It goes on to say, when people who are fighting injure a pregnant woman, so that there is a miscarriage and yet no further harm follows, the one responsible shall be fined what the woman's husband demands, paying as much as the judges determine. If any harm follows, then you shall give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, and stripe for stripe. Notice the conditions set in these readings. If a death is caused willingly, then the murderer may be sentenced to the death penalty. But if it was not premeditated, if it was an accident, that person may be excused. If someone is hurt because of the actions of another person, some form of restitution may be sought for damages based on the determination of a judge. There are rules that one can take a life for a life, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. But yet, many Old Testament legal scholars would agree that this is not meant to be taken literally. These rules were really to explain that restitution paid to a victim ought to be equal to the harm that was done. A reading from Matthew. Jesus said, "You have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, 'You shall not murder,' and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment. But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a brother or sister, you will be liable to the council. And if you say, 'You fool,' you will be liable to the hell of fire. So when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave the gift there before the altar and go. First, be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are on your way to court with them, or your accuser may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you will be thrown into prison. Truly I tell you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny." In this story, Jesus offers an interesting take on restitution and reconciliation, suggesting that the two parties involved ought to try to come to an agreement on their own as soon as they can. Jesus knows that the longer we wait for restitution and reconciliation, the more pain and suffering may happen. Jesus also suggests that if two people can work things out and come to an agreement on their own, the restitution agreed upon by the two may actually be less severe than what the laws and the judges demand. Jesus also points out that whenever someone wrongs another person for any reason, we ought to seek forgiveness and to make amends to our wrongdoing, along with proper restitution. A reading from Romans chapter 12. St. Paul says, "Let love be genuine, hate what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with mutual affection. Outdo another person in showing honor. Do not lag in zeal. Be ardent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in suffering. Persevere in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints. Extend hospitality to the stranger. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Do not claim to be wiser than you are. Do not repay anyone evil for evil, but take thought for what is noble in the sight of all. If it is possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave room for the wrath of God. For it is written, 'Vengeance is mine, I will repay,' says the Lord. No, if your enemies are hungry, feed them. If they are thirsty, give them something to drink. For by doing this, you will heap burning coals on their heads. Do not be overcome with evil, but overcome evil with good." St. Paul talks about what it means to live together in community. Too often, the punishment for a crime or a perceived crime is often more severe than what is actually needed. It does not meet that eye for an eye idea. When we are hurt by someone, it's our natural human instinct to want to seek vengeance and revenge. And that vengeance is more oftentimes more painful than the actual crime. Vigilante justice is not a good thing. So St. Paul says, let God be the judge, or let the courts be the judge. I can't help but think what took place here in Kenosha, where a young boy took it upon himself to seek vengeance on someone he perceived as being in the wrong. By taking things upon himself, 2 people were killed and 1 was severely injured. Had the young boy left justice to be in the hands of the police and the authorities, this may never have happened. A reading from Matthew 7. Do not judge so that you may not be judged. For with the judgment you make, you will be judged. And the measure you give will be the measure you get. Why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye, but do not notice the log in your own eye? Or how can you say to your neighbor, let me take the speck out of your eye, while the log is in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. Jesus in this parable is saying that judges are needed in any society. We see this with the beginning of Moses. People do need to be held accountable for their actions and for their inactions. As humans, we need to ask ourselves, are we able to judge others completely, impartially, and justly? Are we able to keep our own personal beliefs, morals, and emotions from entering into our minds when we are judging others? Can we see all people fairly and equally? Can we truly judge others while not taking into account their skin color, their race, their gender, their religion or age, or any other aspect of their life? Probably not. That's why Jesus says it's so hard to judge others, because we all have faults in our own lives. A reading from John chapter 7. Jesus said, I did 1 miracle, and you were all amazed. Yet, because Moses gave you circumcision, though actually it did not come from Moses, but from the patriarchs, you circumcise a boy on the Sabbath. Now, if a boy can be circumcised on the Sabbath, so that the law of Moses may not be broken, why are you angry with me for healing a man's whole body on the Sabbath? Stop judging by mere appearances, but instead judge correctly. Appearances. It does not just mean how someone looks. When judging, we need to look at the whole situation. For example, if a 3-year-old kid takes a candy bar from the store and takes it home with them, should they be punished for the maximum extent of the law for stealing? Probably not. Jesus seems to suggest that what may be wrong in one situation may not be wrong in another. Currently, there's a large problem with mass incarceration in America. Oftentimes, people of color, such as African Americans and the Latinx population, face larger penalties, stiffer fines, and spend more time in jail than white folks. Systemic racism is a large problem within our justice and correctional system. After slavery was abolished, many laws were written that are still on the books, specifically targeting the newly freed slaves and African Americans. Jim Crow laws are what we call them. A reading from Isaiah chapter 61. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me. He has sent me to bring good news to the oppressed, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and release to the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, to provide those who mourn in Zion, to give them garland instead of ashes, oil of gladness instead of mourning, the mantle of praise instead of a faint spirit. For I, the Lord, love justice. I hate robbery and wrongdoing. I will faithfully give them their recompense, and I will make an everlasting covenant with them. For as the earth brings forth its shoots, and as the garden causes what is sown to spring up, So the Lord God will cause righteousness and praise to spring up before all nations. I love this chapter in Isaiah because it speaks about rebuilding, renewal, and change, all brought about by God. There's a call at the beginning to release the prisoner, because Isaiah knows that many people that are imprisoned unfairly. Locking people up in prison does not bring about change in the person or in the society. Locking people up is only punitive. It's not restorative, nor does it bring about rehabilitation. The Old Testament views on laws, rules, and judicial systems seem to be more about restitution and retribution. Its focus tends to be more about maintaining orders of society and social norms. Whereas in the New Testament, with Jesus' teachings, the views on laws, rules, and judicial system is more focused on the restoration of relationships between people and the renewal of society, not so much on punishments or getting even. Jesus' focus is more about holding people accountable through reconciliation, forgiveness, and mutual love. The Bible does have some concerning topics about overly harsh punishments for what seem to be nonviolent crimes, such as stoning a child to death if they talk back to their parents. But there always seems to be a theme throughout the whole Bible that we need to judge people fairly and equally in non-biased ways, oftentimes using judges to help out, or by setting very strict rules and regulations that everybody has to abide by. So the question for us is, how do we hold people accountable while at the same time showing love, compassion, and fairness? I thank you for joining me today as we looked at just some of the biblical texts dealing with justice systems and laws. Remember, there are over 613 laws in the Old Testament alone, so it's difficult to touch on all of them. Next week, we will be talking about the topic of abortion. So please join me. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day. God bless.